Citizens, society, and the state. The people of Nigeria have some huge challenges in establishing democratic ties with their government. Democratization is always a difficult process because it assumes that citizens have both the time and means to pay attention to political and societal issues. Even in advanced democracies, people often do not link their everyday concerns with those of the government. Many societal characteristics of Nigeria make democratization a challenge. A large gap between the rich and poor. Like Mexico, the distribution of income in Nigeria is very unequal, Gini index of 0.48, with a few people being very wealthy and most being very poor. However, Nigeria's economy shows fewer signs of growth, so the outlook for closing the income gap is much bleaker. Health issues. Like many other African nations, Nigeria has high rates of HIV and AIDS, with some estimating that 1 of every 11 HIV/AIDS sufferers in the world lives in Nigeria. The toll that the disease has taken on the African continent is incalculable, and the cost of the Nigerian economy, as well as the society in general, is immeasurable. The government has generally made AIDS a secondary priority, leaving much of the challenge to small groups of underfunded non-governmental organizations, NGOs. The government has provided medications through a small number of clinics, but they reach only a few thousand people in a country where several million people are estimated to be HIV positive. Literacy. Nigeria's overall literacy rate is 59.6%, but there is a gap between the male literacy rate at 69.2% and the female rate of 49.7%. This is higher than for many other nations in Africa, but is below the world average of 89.9% for men and 82.2% for women. Cleavages. Nigeria has one of the most fragmented societies in the world, with important cleavages based on ethnicity, religion, region, urban-rural differences, and social class. Nigeria is similar to Russia in that both have had to contend with ethnic-based civil wars. Russia in the ongoing conflict with Chechnya, and Nigeria with the Biafran civil war between 1967 and 1970. In both countries, the ethnic conflicts have undermined the basic legitimacy of the government. The consequences of these cleavages for the Nigerian political systems have been grave because they have made any basic agreements about governance almost impossible. Ethnicity. Nigeria has between 250 to 400 separate ethnic groups, with their own array of customs, languages, and religions. The 3 largest groups, the Hausa Fulani, Igbo, and Yoruba, have very little in common and generally cannot speak one another's languages. They live separately in their own enclaves, and virtually no contact takes place among the groups. Religion. In China and the former Soviet Union, ethnic tensions were managed by imposing communism on the society so that some unifying ideology held the people together. Nigeria has had no such ideology, but instead its political culture is made more complex by competing religions. About half of all Nigerians are Muslim, 40% are Christian, and the remaining 10% affiliate with native religions. Ethnic tensions are exacerbated by religious differences among Muslims, Christians, and those that practice native religions. International tensions between Muslims and Christians are reflected in Nigeria, but their arguments are rooted in the preferential treatment that the British gave to Christians. Disputes regarding the religious law of Islam, the Sharia, and its role in the nation's policy-making practices reflect the significance of religious cleavages. Region, North versus South. Although Nigeria's ethnic divisions are multiple, the country was divided into 3 federated regions in 1955, 5 years before independence was official. These regions follow ethnic and religious divisions, and they are the basis for settling elections and legislative procedures, as well as political party affiliations. Another way to divide Nigeria by region is North versus South, with the North being primarily Muslim and the South mainly Christian. Urban-rural differences. As in many other countries, significant urban-rural differences divide Nigeria. Political organizations and interest groups exist primarily in cities, as well as newspapers and electronic media sources. Although their activities were suppressed by the annulment of the election of 1993 and the execution of rights activist and environmentalist Ken Saro-Wiwa in 1995, most organized protests have taken place in cities. Social class. The division between elites and ordinary people runs deep in Nigeria. The wealth of the elite stems from control of the state and the resources of the country. They have maintained power through appealing to ethnic and religious identities of the people. The elites generally found it difficult to abandon their access to the government's treasury for personal gain, and yet many educated elite would like to see Nigeria transformed into a modern nation based on democratic principles. Public opinion and political participation. Nigeria is not yet a democracy, and despite a historically rich civil society, its citizens have been encouraged to relate to government as subjects, not as active participants. Some activities are now taking place in civil society, or the realm outside the government influence, with some professional associations, trade unions, religious groups, and various other interest groups emerging. Even with the presence of military rule, presidents have generally allowed a free press to exist, and interest group membership to be maintained. Patron clientelism, prebendilism. Much participation, particularly in rural areas, still takes place through the patron-client system. The special brand of clientelism in Nigerian politics is known as prebendilism, a term borrowed from Max Weber's concept of an extremely personalized system of rule, in which all public offices are treated as personal fiefdoms. By creating large patronage networks based on personal loyalty, civilian officials have skewed economic and political management to such an extent that they have often discredited themselves. Local government officials gain support from villagers through dispensing favors, and they in turn receive favors for supporting patron bosses. Of course, most favors are exchanged among the political elite, but the pattern persists in all levels. With patron clientelism comes corruption and informal influence, but it does represent an established form of political participation in Nigeria. Civil society. In Nigeria's post-colonial history, many formal interest groups and informal voluntary associations have actively sought to influence political decisions. Since 1999, many have strengthened, some serving as centripetal forces, encouraging Nigerian unity, and others creating centrifugal forces, causing Nigeria to fragment along ethnic and religious lines. One group that has managed to do both is the Movement for the Survival of the Ogoni People, or MOSOP, founded by dissident Ken Saro-Wiwa in the 1990s. MOSOP has worked to apply national laws to secure financial benefits for the Ogoni and the Niger Delta, and to hold foreign-operated oil companies to environmental standards. Trade unions and professional organizations have been particularly active in trying to protect the rights of their members. For example, the National Union of Petroleum and Gas Workers, NUPENG, has been an influential voice for workers in an all-important petroleum industry. Formal associations for legal, medical, and journalism professions articulate the political interests of Nigeria's growing professional class. Voting behavior. Nigerian citizens have voted in national elections since 1959, but since many elections have been canceled or postponed by the military and others have been fraudulent, voter behavior patterns are difficult to track. Political parties are numerous and fluid, with most formed around the charisma of their candidates for office. So party loyalty is an imperfect reflection of voter attitudes. Babangida's annulment of the 1993 election also put a damper on political participation during most of the 1990s. However, elections on local, state, and national levels were held in 1999 and 2003. Although the results appear to be fraudulent, nevertheless, Nigerian citizens voted in large numbers in both the 1999 and 2003 elections. One estimate is that close to two-thirds of eligible voters actually voted in 2003, but the widespread corruption around the election makes these figures highly unreliable. The participation rates in 2007 election are almost impossible to calculate because of voter fraud and inability of legitimate voters to cast their ballots. In the more reliable election of 2011, more than 3% of the votes were declared invalid, but the turnout of valid voters was almost 54%. In 2015, 2.8% were declared invalid, but the turnout was less than 44%, partly because of difficulty in voting in areas in the northeast where the terrorist organization Boko Haram held control at the time of the election. Attitudes toward government. Not surprisingly, most Nigerians have a low level of trust in their government. General Abacha was so widely disliked that there was rejoicing and celebration in the street when he died unexpectedly in 1998. With some citizens dubbing the event a coup from heaven. Nigerians in general are skeptical about the prospects for democracy, and they do not believe that elections are conducted in a fair and honest way. Whether or not Nigerians will remain cynical, however, is yet to be seen. In the early days of independence, attitudes towards the government were generally much more favorable, and many citizens expressed an identity as Nigerians, not just members of ethnic groups. Perhaps the cynicism results from the notorious rule of Babangida and Abacha in the 1980s and 90s, and will soon change. However, without the commitment to democracy from political elites, ordinary citizens are unlikely to see their government in a positive light in the near future. According to an Afrobarometer survey published in 2013, the majority of citizens, 67%, described the present economic condition of the country as very bad or fairly bad. Additionally, the survey revealed that 81% of Nigerians assessed the government's performance in managing the economy as very badly or fairly bad. 50% say they would go to the police for assistance if they were victims of the crime. The top reason for not going to the police is the need to pay a bribe. Despite these bleak statistics, many Nigerians thought the quality of the election of 2011 was better than the election of 2007. Still, only 38% rated the election as completely free and fair. Nigerian attitudes toward democracy are shared by citizens in many other African countries. According to an Afrobarometer survey published in 2006, 6 in 10 Africans sampled in 18 countries said that democracy was preferable to any other form of government. However, satisfaction with democracy dipped to 45% from 58% in 2001. Nigerian citizens' negative perceptions of their government are based in some very solid evidence that government officials are quite corrupt. Transparency International, a private organization that compiles statistics about corruption in countries around the world, usually ranks Nigeria very low in the Transparency International Corruption Perceptions Index, and they publish every year. In 2006, Nigeria ranked 142nd out of 146 countries in terms of how clean its government is. In 2014, the country's rank was 136. Still toward the bottom of the list, but with the same score, 27, as Iran and Russia. Mexico's score, 35, and China's score, 36, were somewhat higher, but 5 of the 6 core countries are low, considering that the scale is 1 to 100. Only the United Kingdom, with a score of 78, can claim to have a relatively clean government, with a rank of 17 out of 178 countries. China, Mexico, and Nigeria are all characterized by patron clientelism, so it is unsurprising that they all have relatively low CPI scores. Since Transparency International considers a score of 1 to be highly corrupt, the chart supports the fact that corruption is a big problem in all of the 6 countries except for the United Kingdom. In all 5 cases, China, Mexico, Nigeria, Iran, and Russia, corruption is part of the political culture, and bribes and favoritism are part of the ways that the governments operate. Nigeria's prebendalism permeates the political system to such a degree that political participation cannot take place outside its influence. One controversial action taken by Yar'Adua's administration in 2008 was a removal from office of Nuhu Ribadu, the head of the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, EFCC, a government organization that is set up to fight corruption. Since 2003, Ribadu had gained a reputation for bravely charging and prosecuting the politicians, particularly the state governors, who are responsible for most of the fraud and looting of public funds. In 2007, the EFCC arrested 7 former governors, including James Abori of the oil-rich Delta states, who was a leader of the ruling People's Democratic Party and a major funder of Yar'Adua's election campaign. 2 weeks after Abori's arrest, the government announced that Ribadu was resigning in order to be re-educated in a special training program. Many believe that EFCC had made real progress in addressing Nigeria's corruption, but the agency was not allowed to continue its investigations and arrests. During the election campaign of 2015, Muhammadu Buhari promised to curb corruption, including theft of public funds, by elites and poor government practices and supervision. If he succeeds in his promise, he will reverse a decades-old pattern of embedded corruption. Protests and political participation. Since the return of democracy in 1999, a number of ethnic-based and religious movements have mobilized to pressure the federal government to address their grievances. International oil companies have been major targets, especially in the Niger Delta area where companies and oil fields are centered. A widely publicized protest occurred in July 2002 when a group of unarmed Ijaw women occupied Chevron Texaco Nigeria's operations for 10 days. The siege ended when Chevron Texaco's official agreed to provide jobs for the women's sons and set up a credit plan to help village women start businesses. Although this protest ended peacefully, others were violently suppressed by the Obasanjo government. A major upswing in protests and unrest began in early 2006, with groups organizing to attack foreign-based oil companies. Armed rebel gangs have blown up pipelines, disabled pumping stations, and kidnapped foreign oil workers. These events in Nigeria, the world's 8th largest oil exporter, have affected international energy markets, contributing to higher prices and tighter supplies. As a result, Production sites have been shut down, and some companies have left Nigeria, often blaming the government for its inability to stop the problems. An amnesty was signed in 2009, and so in recent years, the conflicts have lessened, but the uneasiness remains. After the election of 2011, when Goodluck Jonathan, a Christian from the South, retained the presidency that he had assumed when Yar'Adua died in 2010, protests erupted in the North among people who believed that the informal rule of alternating presidents from the North and South had been violated. One group, Boko Haram, carried out almost daily shootings and occasional bombings, trying to undermine Jonathan's authority. The group, whose name means Western education is sinful, says it is fighting for the wider application of Sharia law in Nigeria, and has claimed responsibility for hundreds of attacks in the north, often aimed at police, churches, and bars. Although Boko Haram's ideology is not widely supported in Nigeria, where most Muslims are moderate, it has built a following by playing on people's frustrations. Amnesty International has criticized the Nigerian military's retaliation to attacks, claiming that unlawful arrests, extrajudicial killings, and unexplained disappearances have occurred. By 2013, Boko Haram had killed more than 1,000 people, and so the Nigerian government launched a campaign to crush the insurgency, using thousands of troops, vehicles, and even fighter jets and helicopter gunships. President Jonathan placed a large group of Nigeria's north under a state of emergency, ordering troops to take all necessary action to end the terrorism. In May 2013, more than 200 people were killed in what local officials, residents, and human rights groups said was a sweeping massacre by Nigerian forces in Baga, in northern Nigeria. Since much of the area was put under a communications blackout, it was difficult to know what was going on, but the crackdown resulted in thousands of people fleeing across the border to Niger. In 2014 and 2015, Boko Haram stepped up the attacks and gained international attention with the kidnapping and disappearance of 276 schoolgirls from Chibok in April 2014. In mid-2014, the group gained control of territory in their home state of Borno. In 2015, a military coalition, including Chad, Niger, and Nigeria, displaced the group from most of its territory. However, violence continued as Boko Haram claimed responsibility for further attacks that continued into the fall.